Stop the war, stop the war. Stop the war, stop the war. Stop the war, stop the war. Stop the war.
Hello, everyone. It's a privilege to be here with Bill Grover today. He's a veteran. He's from Salem, Massachusetts, and we're going to talk about his experience in the military today.
Right.
Nice to see you, Bill.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. Yeah. Yes, I spent my military career during the Vietnam era, and I enlisted to avoid the draft after I graduated from college
Okay.
with a bachelor's degree in architecture.
So you were like 18, 19, how old were you?
I was actually 23. I was in a 5-year architecture program that at the end of the program I had enough college deferments to realize that when I graduated, the draft board was probably going to pull my number, and I was going to be drafted like some of my friends who had graduated, and so what I needed to do was find a way to use my career as an architect while I was in the military.
Okay.
And so,
So you went right ahead and enlisted before they came and knocking on your door, so to speak.
absolutely, yeah. In college, I didn't have a lot of money. I was, pretty poor through most of my college
Like
career.
most students.
Right. It was, a couple days without eating, until some money came
They're called the
in.
good old days.
The good old days.
The good
yeah,
old days.
Yeah.
Right.
And I knew I didn't want to be pounding the rice paddies, as we called it in Vietnam, because that's where most of the draftees were going at that time.
Right.
So, a couple weeks before I left school, at the end of my college career, I went up to a Navy Navy recruiter in a white uniform, and I said I wanted to get into the Seabees.
Okay.
Because then, if I spent my time in the Seabees, I could get my architectural registration and get the experience and pass the test and come out of my military service as a registered architect. And
Right.
this-
Well, that's interesting because here you are, graduating from college, you're an architect, and you join the Navy, which is different than most, it's a different path than most people take. Most people probably would not go in that direction. But here you were enlisting.
Right. Some of my friends went into the Peace Corps to avoid the draft.
Right.
Others, a couple of them went to Canada, and then others enlisted in other branches of the service in the officers' corps, not to avoid the draft. So that was my goal. My primary goal was to avoid being drafted.
Right. Well, a lot of people are trying to avoid being drafted. Let's go back to that. There was a terrible conflict in this country with the young people who were looking at military service, and not voluntarily, but we had a lottery, as I recall. So, how do you feel about that? I mean, you saw that going on. What was it like for you? Did you agree with what was going on with that?
Well, I was pretty unconscious socially, I think. I was aware of the protest about the war, but I didn't have an opinion about it. I didn't really investigate it to find out about it.
Right.
I suppose I should have. In my college career, was from 1960 to 1966.
Right.
And a lot of things were happening. The civil rights movement was happening.
Right, it was an active time.
Right. I was on the swim team. I was a competitive swimmer, so my summer jobs were working as lifeguards at city pools in Miami. I grew up in Miami and went to the University of Florida. And the pools that I lifeguarded in were all, in the early 60s, were all segregated. And even though I was lifeguarding in a pool.
So even at that time, you saw segregation.
Right, and I'm
It's hard to believe sitting here today that this,
right.
but we forget.
Well, yeah, and I was aware of colored drinking fountains, colored bathrooms, colored, whites only counters and things like that. But it wasn't. It didn't affect me. I was
Right.
sort of unconscious of what was going on.
Right,
And
right.
So one summer, the pools were integrated. Segregation was ended, and Miami went to an integrated system, and all the pools became integrated. So this pool that I worked at before, which was all white, the next summer was all black because it was right on the border of a black neighborhood, and it was really strange. And I should have started to wake up then, but it just seemed like this was what was happening, and I didn't have an opinion about it. So
Well, now you're talking about racism, and it's interesting because we don't really associate military service in things related to the war with racism. Racism is more just basically a social problem within our country, within our neighborhoods. But then again, you look at who we go to war against and what type of assignments different people get when they enlist.
right.
Do you see racism in the military?
Well, that was part of my waking up. Getting back to the recruiter on the campus, I asked him about the CBs. I said I wanted to get into the CBs, and he said, "Boy, we've got a really long list of people that are waiting to get in the CBs. You're probably going to get drafted before you
It's an
get
elite
taken."
group.
The CBs.
Right.
Well, it was the engineering corps of the Navy, and that's where I wanted to be. And the recruiter pulls out this picture of this guy in the white uniform with this beautiful blonde pinning gold wings on him, a Corvette in the background, and back behind the Corvette was this big F-4 Blue Angels jet.
It's a dream come true.
And he said, "How would you like to fly airplanes?" I'd always wanted to fly. I had been interested in that. My uncle was a Air Force pilot, career Air Force pilot, and I
Okay.
really idolized him. So I said, "Sure." And
Okay.
I
Okay.
took the bait and went off to boot camp at Pensacola, completed my flight training, became an officer, completed my flight training,
Right.
and got plowed back as an instructor back to Pensacola and then ultimately Meridian, Mississippi.
Okay.
And it was at my time in Meridian, Mississippi that I started to really wake up to what was going on, because the flying was really, really a spiritual thing for me. I loved flying, the flying.
Which is interesting. So here you are enlisting in the Navy to be a pilot, and it's a spiritual connection for you because of the way you feel about flying planes.
Right, and it's about the ego. I mean, obviously my ego is way off the chart, and I felt I could thread a needle with an airplane. I loved it. I loved.
Well, a healthy ego probably served you well.
Probably, I suppose so. And in Meridian, I got an opportunity to get my creative energies out that I developed in architecture, and was volunteered to do set designs for a little theater group while I was there. So that was interesting. I was teaching kids how to fly and doing this really spiritual thing, and then I was also on the creative side of doing set designs for the little theater group. So it was an exciting time for me. But
Yeah.
it was also a time that I really started to wake up, because I started to talk to pilots that had been to Vietnam.
So you started changing.
I started to realize what this beautiful airplane was being used for.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, up until that point, I hadn't really thought about that. When I volunteered to go into the Navy, I was going to end the war single-handedly. I was so naive. I thought me and my airplane against another pilot and his airplane was what it was all about. And
Well, flying is a dangerous assignment, and if you talk to people who were involved in the war, the mortality rate for people in helicopters or planes was astronomical. In general, it was astronomical. It was too much, but particularly in that for those who were flying in the helicopter, it was almost like a sitting duck.
Right, right.
And so here you were, now you're learning how to fly. Do you remember the first day you got into a military plane?
Yeah, it was exciting. It was very exciting.
I can imagine.
And I remember more my first solo flight, you know, when the instructor gets out of the airplane and sends you off to do some touch and goes, and there's no instructor in the back seat anymore. That was really empowering.
It's probably an old school plane. It's probably not rigged up like today's aircraft.
No, it was, you know, it was a trainer, T-34. It's a
Right.
Beechcraft Bonanza and civilian aircraft. It was, you know, it was exciting, and I was hooked. You know, the flying was the thing, and teaching flying was really very positive too, because I felt I learned more about flying teaching it than I gone to a combat squadron after I got my wings.
And you come into the Navy with these ideals that you've had all through growing up, and now you're sort of, you're becoming a pilot. It's a dream come true.
Right.
And like you said, it's a spiritual thing for you. So it's a pretty unique situation for you to be in.
Right.
And now you're starting to change. And were you sort of disillusioned by your purpose in the military and what the military was really doing? And
Very much so, but it was after connecting with other instructors, you know, all through my flight school, you know, the instructors didn't talk to me about what they did in Vietnam. You know, all the time that I flew as a student.
how did you feel about it? Did you have any feelings about Vietnamese people?
It was something that...
Did you know any?
Vietnamese people? No, I didn't know any Vietnamese people.
Were you, was communism an issue for you?
Well, communism was a fact of...
Something you
of
read
nature.
about in
Right.
grammar school? Or?
It didn't impact me, you know. It didn't
No.
impact me in school. It didn't impact me in my social life. I mean, it wasn't part of my consciousness. And what I think is really important is that the concept that I was pretty much unconscious about the geopolitical situation of the world and what was going on. You know, I had my environment, my friends, the things that I was doing, and I did what you know, I lived in a sort of an isolated world.
When
And
you say you're changing, so where is the change taking you now that it's starting to happen, now that you're involved?
Well, it happened with the military. I mean, it happened after talking to pilots that had been to Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And I began to realize that that human life that I had always been taught was sacred
Mm-hmm.
humans had to be dehumanized in order for us to go to war and kill them, so that they, you know, they were less than human. And that's true of how combat pilots thought of Vietnamese people. They were gooks and slopeheads. They weren't real people. And I realized
We'll talk about racism, there it is.
that it is, and it's a huge piece of what war's all about. You
Right.
can't send your sons and daughters into a theater and have them kill people after you've taught them human life is sacred. You know, they've been brought up without telling them also that these people are not human. You know, they're expendable. So
Right,
so that
right.
that piece of it, and I saw that a lot of the pilots, even pilots I went to flight school with that went to Vietnam and came back as instructors, had changed quite a bit, and that scared me a little bit too, because I didn't want to have that happen to me. And
Yeah.
I became disillusioned about the war and what we were doing, and what I would, if I went to a combat squadron, would be asked to do with this beautiful airplane that I thought was so spiritual. So I went in, my boot camp was in the...
So there's a real conflict there.
Yeah, it was huge. I mean, I started speaking out, at the little theater group. I didn't speak out in uniform. And I was at a cast party and said I was going to turn down orders to Vietnam. I was not going to extend my enlistment. I was going to get out of the Navy. And
Right.
the gentleman I was talking to, who had been a friend of mine throughout the whole little theater, whole year of working on 5 or 6 sets, he and I, hand in hand, built these sets together. I never.
So you're also doing the set design. You're really getting into this now.
Right, and I was connecting with the community, and he got really upset and walked out of the cast party. And the next day, I was called into my commanding officer's office, and I had to do what I call the Asiatic two-step on the carpet. So my commanding officer said, "I heard you were talking against the war yesterday," and I don't remember the exact questions that he asked me, but
Right.
I knew at that point I needed to state my case, because I couldn't. I couldn't deny it anymore, and I told him that I had heard terrible things about what was going on over there. I didn't think we had any business being in this
Right.
war in Vietnam, and
Right.
ultimately, when we finished our conversation, he turned to me, and here's this commander with all these ribbons, a fighter pilot who had been 2 or 3 tours of duty in Vietnam, said, "I agree with you. I just don't want you to, to speak out in uniform, and I don't want you to be talking to the students about your political beliefs." And we agreed that that's what I would do.
Right.
And so, I ultimately got an early out.
Well, it was going on all over the place. I mean, we see the old film clips
Yeah.
of the burning the flag and the draft cards. I mean, it was really a divisive thing. And it's changed today. And you look at what's going on today. The veterans are so idolized, and people really appreciate what they're doing, and I think it's because the country was really attacked. Back in the 60s, I mean, like I said, I mean, the communists were not marching up Mass Avenue,
Right.
and taking over.
Well, I'm also now part of Veterans for Peace.
Veterans for Peace,
Yeah,
okay.
and I'm totally against war, any war, no matter what the excuse was. And in terms of what's happening currently in Afghanistan, obviously we've pulled out of Iraq, but during the time we were in Iraq, I felt like we were a paramilitary force protecting corporations and their rights to resources that we needed for our lifestyles in the United States. And I have been a strong opponent of war and the idea that we needed to be in Afghanistan and Iraq is doing the same thing, because now.
What is your take on Iraq? I mean, you saw the board at the United Nations talking about weapons of mass destruction. Now that the dust is settled and we're out of there, I mean, how do you feel about what went on there as a veteran? I mean,
Well,
does it upset you? Does it?
One of the problems with our country's response to Iraq, or the wars in the Middle East that we participated in, is we have a volunteer military, and had the draft been used to support that war, my sense is our country would have said, no, we're not doing that. There would have been a stronger opposition against it.
Right.
But that doesn't make what was happening correct. In Afghanistan and in Iraq, and mostly in Iraq, I think, we operated as an occupying force, almost as an imperial army, protecting our values and our values that we imposed on the Iraqi people in order to take the resources, mostly oil, for our American corporations. But what really is sad about the Iraqi war is that we have trained our soldiers to dehumanize the Muslim, race when they go into combat, because we use the terms now.
Well, it's funny how all of a sudden we were told that we had strong feelings for the Iraqi people, that we had to protect them against a tyrant. But if you went up and asked the average individual years ago, how do you feel about the Iraqi population, or do you feel they're being taken advantage of, or things aren't right over there, a lot of people really didn't have any knowledge or opinion about them.
Right.
As we go about our day-to-day routines, it's kind of what's important to us. But all of a sudden now we had to adopt a consciousness that included the well-being of the Iraqi people. And we went for it in a big way. And it was the theater they had sort of laid out there for us to get involved with. And we did. And just yesterday, Leon Panetta was on, and he was talking about how he's going to slash the budget by hundreds of millions of dollars, and we're going to shift to a more air-oriented military, and we're going to take the boots off the ground.
That's mostly the drone, the success of the drone campaigns that are being done. I think they call it the chair force. Instead of an air force, we have a chair force. I have a friend who has a cousin that works that's in the Air Force and sits at a computer desk in San Antonio and sends drones into Libya. Now you go figure how that man is going to get connected with all the things that he's doing.
It's a pretty cold way to commit some atrocities. No one's involved, no one's in that plane,
Right.
and it's a flying bomb or a spy, whatever they use the drone for.
Right. The technology of war is changing.
It can be effective. It's great that no one is going to, the only people that are going to feel it are the people that are being attacked.
And innocent people. That's
Innocent
the sad.
people.
That's the sad thing. That we're not troops against troops. We're having a huge impact on
The collateral
innocent.
damage is upsetting.
And my sort of end to my commitment to get out of the military and not support it anymore really was cemented when I saw that Life magazine photograph of that little girl running down the road after her village had been napalmed, and she was totally naked. 80% of her body.
We
had
all
been
remember
burned.
that picture.
That picture was powerful for me.
It was very
because
powerful.
I was a Navy pilot, and Navy pilots were doing the napalming. Marine pilots, Air Force pilots. It was all part of what we called free fire zones, that we could do these things. In Iraq, we do the same thing. We create free fire zones. We create areas where there aren't any friendlies, and that sort of means that anything that moves then is not a friendly, in the mindset, and that those kinds of criteria for how we fight a war is hugely racist. I mean,
Right.
in Iraq and Afghanistan, we asked our soldiers to think of the enemy as towel heads or camel jockeys, and the worst description is desert nigger now. And that is
It's horrible.
The troops are being trained to use those terms by officers and NCOs who are responsible for training them. So this whole racism
We
piece
don't
of-
really talk about the numbers of the innocent that have been wiped out, the collateral damage, the women, the young children, the old men, people who have nothing to do with anything but the fact that they were placed on this planet at that point.
Well, there's an Iraqi veteran speaking out now on YouTube. His name's Michael Preisner. There's a YouTube video of his speech at the Winter Soldier conference,
Okay.
and it's really amazing. I encourage people to take a look at what he has to say about his role in Iraq. And he was right, boots on the ground. He was doing the things that we're talking about, that I only heard secondhand from about in Vietnam.
So here you are now. So everything is by the boards.
Right.
And you're the same old guy or not the same old guy?
Well, that started my consciousness shift. It really did. But it was about
So your morals started to rise up within you, and you started to feel things about
right.
that you hadn't felt before, probably.
And when I got out of the Navy, I had to come back into architecture because I wanted to get back to the creative thing. And then my daughter was born, and when I was holding my daughter, you know, the day she was born, this perfect being in my hand, I realized that I was in a fashion industry and I didn't care about her future. And architecture at that time was truly a fashion industry. We were focused on getting published, you know, in the architectural magazines,
Right.
doing the best designs, the most fashionable designs.
Right.
So that started me on a path to look at not just war as a racist thing, but our relationship with the earth and our relationship with each other. And 23 years later now, I'm doing some volunteer work for the Pachamama Alliance. I'm a facilitator for the Awakening the Dreamer program that the Pachamama Alliance has created, and we look at things that are happening in the world now, and how and why they're, you know, why we've actually had an impact on the condition of the world, the choices that we've made, and the unexamined assumptions that we have for making those choices. So I'm excited about that, and I'm very, very, very passionate now about these issues. The
Okay.
Pachamama Alliance their purpose is to bring about an ecologically sustainable, spiritually fulfilling, and socially just human presence on the planet. And that's exciting. You know, that's a vision for the future that I could really step into and try to help
To
promote.
maybe see a day when there are no more wars. I mean, how many people will have to die before it's all over? Will the planet have to explode? That's been going on forever. We'd really like to see some peacetime.
Right, and we have to, I mean, we're living the future that was created by out-of-work actor by the name of Ronald Reagan, who told us every week that progress was our most important product. And so we've created this world of haves and have-nots, and in reality, our lifestyle is causing a lot of damage in third world countries because our lifestyle needs the support of the resources of those countries. And so we go to war to protect our right to those resources that really belong to somebody else. So war is a social justice issue, a huge racist issue, and it should not be tolerated by any country or anybody.
It's a pleasure to be talking with you today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to.
I consider you a hero.
Thanks.
And to listen to you talk and how it spurred your creativity and everything and how it changed you is fascinating.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
It's great.
Stop the war, stop the war. Truckload of soldiers, a boatload of guns took our mothers, fathers, our daughters and sons. Just a young boy being a man. Don't let him die in the desert sand. Stop the war. Stop the war, stop the war. Stop the war, stop the war. Stop the war, stop the war.
4 2/3 is the limit for Liberty. That was what it was with. That was what it was for Colbert. He went 4 2/3. New pitcher is Paul Cingarella. Cingarella comes in replacing Alex Liberty. So Cingarella was Liberty was not batting, and Cingarella will not bat as well as they keep the offensive order intact. Straight change. So 7 runs on 7 hits for Liberty. He leaves with his team trailing by a run, 7-6, with 2 outs in the bottom of the 5th inning. So Cingarella, left-hander, will come in replacing Liberty. Koopman went first pitch swinging. And Cingarella throws strike 1 to Jake Kulovich. Koopman has a stolen base. As Kulovich walked, stole a base, went to third on a wild pitch, and scored when Dana doubled. This time he hits it out into center field, and that'll do it for the inning as he flies out to the center fielder. But Marblehead picks up a couple of runs, takes the lead back, and at the end of 5, it's Marblehead 7. Have I got that right? Marblehead 6 and Winthrop 5.